James Gunn shouldn't reboot the DC universe. How could they move on from the Snyderverse? He should be restoring the Snyderverse. Hashtag restore the Snyderverse. Hashtag make the Batfleck movie. Hashtag boycott WB. Hashtag boycott WBD. Hashtag fire James Gunn. Hashtag Gunn and Safran out. Before I even get into this massive topic, there are a few things I want to establish to prevent any sort of preconceived notion that I'm a Zack Snyder hater due to the title of this video. Number 1, I like Man of Steel. I like it so much that I even made the video entitled I don't hate Man of Steel anymore to course correct my opinion on Man of Steel. Number 2, Wonder Woman is my favorite movie of the DCEU era, and guess what? That movie is co-written by Zack Snyder. Number 3, I have a nearly 40-minute long video discussing why I thoroughly enjoy Zack Snyder's Justice League. So, no, I'm not a Zack Snyder hater, or someone that can't appreciate what Zack Snyder did with the DC properties. With this now being established, the DCEU as we currently know it is dead. Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 3 potentially being recast and cancelled. Henry Cavill's return as Superman didn't even get to take flight and never will take flight again in the DC cinematic universe. Jason Momoa's Aquaman potentially rumored to also be recast, as Jason Momoa may be shifting over to the role of Lobo in Gunn's new DC universe. The Snyderverse era and the post-Snyderverse era of the DCEU are over. James Gunn and Peter Safran are starting from the ground up and making their own DC cinematic universe, starting with an early years Superman movie. This leads me to the number 1 question that has been thrown across all of Twitter since a bunch of DC news has been broken by The Hollywood Reporter. Does the Snyderverse have to die for the new DC cinematic universe to succeed? Well, I've already made 2 big videos discussing what should be done with the DCEU. The first video, Is It Worth Fixing the DCEU Anymore?, is nearly 30 minutes long. In that video, I discussed the problems with the Flash's T storyline, the problem with a Kevin Feige-like figure coming into the picture, and simply continuing the DCEU as is. The conclusion to that video is that ultimately, it's not worth bringing someone in to try and continue fixing the current DCEU. It's not worth pretending like everything is fine and simply pushing forward with the same actors, storylines, or anything related to the current DCEU. It's simply not, for the multitude of reasons I've discussed in that video. The second video, 5 Ways DC Can Still Save the DCEU, is nearly 40 minutes long and was released before Black Adam came out. In that video, I go over 5 different plans that can solve the current problems with the DCEU. Those plans included using the Flash to reset the DCEU entirely, building the DCEU around the cast of Black Adam, no longer doing a connected cinematic universe, restoring the Snyderverse, and finally, killing off the DCEU to focus on the Batman's universe. And after making these 2 videos, which, again, reach over an hour's worth of screen time if you watch them back to back, I can tell you straight up that there is no better option. The answer is yes, the Snyderverse has to die. DC Studios has to kill off the Snyderverse and any sort of connections to it for DC to succeed on the big screen. Now you might be wondering, why? Why is this a good thing? How could killing off something that means so much to people be a positive choice? Firstly, by bringing James Gunn and Peter Safran in, we're finally bringing an end to some of the biggest frustrations that people have had with the DCEU for a very long time. Having someone with a proven track record that loves the source material, understands how comic book movies work, and understands what makes the MCU work, we have that now with James Gunn. I don't understand why some people find it hard to understand why people are so hopeful with Gunn at the helm of the DCU, but I'll explain it as simply as possible. The reason why so many DC fans believe in James Gunn is because of his ongoing track record. People love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, people love the Suicide Squad, and people love Peacemaker. All of these James Gunn projects are highly reviewed and beloved, and since this is the case, people finally have some sense of hope for the DC universe, with Gunn being a co-head of DC Studios. They feel like they finally have someone that they can trust and someone that they can believe in, thanks to Gunn having such a stellar track record. The silence between WB and their fanbase, it's finally over. We now have a semi-open line of communication through James Gunn on Twitter, which is more than what we've had since the old DCEU was created. Since he's taken over as one of the co-heads of DC Studios, he's been calling out fake insiders, debunking fake rumors that rile up the DC fanbase, and even spending time answering some questions about the DC universe. That sort of connection between one of the heads of DC Studios and the DC fanbase has been needed for so long. We've seen how important that connection is with Kevin Feige and the MCU fanbase throughout the last 10 years of the MCU. Now we're finally beginning to foster that much needed connection with Gunn and Safran. The biggest win, in my opinion, is the fact that resetting the entirety of the DC cinematic universe finally brings an end to the poorly constructed hodgepodge that was the DCEU. Let's all be honest here, the DCEU has never been a great cinematic universe. Even with the Zack Snyder slate of movies that we got, no, not the originally planned slate of movies that he actually wanted to do, it still left a lot to be desired. I mean, come on, making a non-hopeful Superman movie that's visually bland color palette wise, starring a fairly one-dimensional Clark Kent for a majority of the movie? Fairly bad decision. A Batman v Superman movie without a Batman origin movie before BVS? An incredibly odd choice. WB forcefully pushing out a Justice League movie that is entirely two different movies put together because they wanted to try and capitalize on what Marvel did with the Avengers? An awful decision that deserves to still be criticized to this day. I'm also fully aware that WB meddled heavily, affecting every single movie across the Snyderverse, Suicide Squad included. I've actually gone over that in my Is It Worth Fixing the DCEU Anymore video. I'm not ignoring that at all. I'm just specifically saying that even ignoring that major problem aside, the slate of Snyderverse projects that we got was flawed, and it wasn't a good cinematic universe. The same thing applies to the post-Snyderverse era of movies as well. Birds of Prey, a decent movie that was basically set up to fail, considering someone thought it'd be a good idea to name the movie Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn instead of something simpler like Harley Quinn, subtitle here. Wonder Woman 1984. Complete and utter disaster. An absolutely terrible movie that ruined any interest people had in Wonder Woman. Black Adam, yet another mediocre superhero movie that ended up failing and now feels pointless due to all of the changes that are being made after Gunn and Safran immediately signed on to be co-heads of DC Studios about 2 weeks after Black Adam's release. The closest this post-Snyderverse era of the DCEU has ever felt like a cinematic universe has been with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. Those are the only two projects that have ever felt like they had the same cinematic feel that MCU projects have, and that's because they're both made by James Gunn. Even then, Peacemaker still has connections to the Snyderverse. With acknowledging that, almost everything else isn't worthy of keeping or even worthy of continuing to flesh out. This is why now feels like the perfect time to hit the reset button on the DC universe. There is absolutely nothing to lose. Everything is a complete and utter mess. None of it makes sense at all anymore. I mean, come on. For example, we have half of Snyder's cast still reprising the roles of the characters they played in the Snyderverse. Yet, it's still no, not the Snyderverse anymore according to WB. What is there to lose by hitting the reset button? It's not like any of the current DCEU characters are in the middle of a big character arc moment. It's not like we're in the middle of a pivotal movie for the cinematic universe specifically. It's not like we're losing anything of value besides Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. There is literally nothing of value to lose. With Gunn and Safran specifically choosing to hit the reset button and even giving the new DC Cinematic Universe an official branded name, the DC Universe, it's going to allow DC Studios to do so much more. It's going to allow them to get an entirely new roster of actors and actresses to sign on to DC Universe movies long term. It's going to allow Gunn and Safran to finally establish some sort of communication with DC fans. It's going to allow them to establish a far more interesting tone than the overly doom and gloom tone that Zack Snyder went for. It's going to allow them to actually leave small things like Easter eggs, name drops, and hints across various movies that end up actually coming into fruition in later DC Universe movies. It's going to allow them to actually make a plan that will actually be seen into fruition, actually be built by someone who has experience working within a cinematic universe, and actually have real points that are specifically being built towards, unlike the Snyderverse era of the DCEU. Yes, I already know the counterpoint that the vocal hardcore Snyderverse fans have to all of this. It's this image. This is their counterpoint. They are now spamming this image alongside the hashtags I mentioned earlier in this video. I know that it's genuinely messed up to say this, but this is an incredibly delusional demand. In fact, it's ridiculous. This is never going to happen and never was going to happen. No matter who signed on to be either the head of DC Studios or co-heads of DC Studios, they're not going to finish Zack Snyder's vision, and understandably so. There is not a single person who would ever want to complete someone else's vision because they have their own vision and that's what they want to bring to life. The idea of being told, hey, we want to sign you, but under the condition of you spending multiple years completing someone else's vision is absolutely absurd. It's a ridiculous demand. It's a pipe dream. And I'd even argue that it goes against the Restore the Snyderverse movement, considering that whole movement's goal was to get WB to bring back Zack Snyder to finish his vision so everyone can move on entirely. I don't know who needs to hear this, but Warner Brothers is not going to bring in Zack Snyder. For the record, yet again, I don't hate Zack Snyder at all. I appreciate what he's done to raise money for charity. I appreciate how much his Snyderverse cast seemed to love him. And I appreciate how much he seemed to simply love comic book stuff, even if he didn't entirely understand the characters. However, none of that changes the fact that WB isn't bringing him back. They're also not going to bring in Ray Fisher again, who for the past several months has been vocally against WB due to how he was wrongfully treated during the original production period of the Justice League movie. Plus, Zack Snyder isn't going to come back when he's having too much fun working on Rebel Moon for Netflix right now. Whether people want to accept it or not, the harsh reality is that the continuation of spamming these hashtags or intensely pushing for a Snyderverse restoration is going to do nothing going forward. We know this because there are too many things that need to happen for it to make sense. We know this because WB isn't going to go out of its way to reward a fan base that constantly harasses actors, actresses, and DC fans that have vocally supported James Gunn's role as co-head of DC Studios across social media. And of course, we especially know this because James Gunn made a statement emphasizing this. Now, while I fully expect this video to lead to people spamming more of those hashtags in the comments below, spamming that same awful DCEU slate image on Twitter, or even spamming images that are legitimately terrible like this, I still stand by my opinion. This is the perfect time for the Snyderverse era of the DCEU to come to an end. It's time for a reset. The DC cinematic universe has essentially been in shambles for the last several years, and as someone who simply loves DC, I just want to see DC make their own version of the MCU. It doesn't have to have the same tone or comedic taste either. I'd actually prefer it if the DCU dove into some different themes that the MCU hasn't explored yet. However, for that to happen, we need someone like Gunn and Safran to come in and start from the ground up. There is only one way Gunn and Safran could do that. They need the Snyderverse era of the DCEU to die, and that's why its death is a good thing. By the Snyderverse era dying, it allows an entirely new foundation to be put together, a new timeline can be formed, a new era can be ushered in, and an entirely new vision can be built for DC's beloved characters to finally reach new heights of success, all from the death of the Snyderverse era of the DCEU. As that happens, the spamming of those hashtags will begin to slowly die out if the new DCU ends up being better than they've ever expected. At least I like to think that'd be the case, hopefully. If worse comes to worse though, if you're someone who doesn't totally believe in James and Peter Safran's vision, you at least have Matt Reeves' The Batman universe, which is being left alone on its own timeline. So regardless, at the end of the day, I like to think everyone still somehow ends up winning. Just like with my "Is it worth fixing the DCEU anymore" video, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Does the Snyderverse have to die for the new DC cinematic universe to succeed?